Hi everybody, it's Stephen Brooke and welcome to Architectural Photography and Composition. We've talked about how difficult interior photography really is, and I've said that it's really, I thought, the most difficult part of what we do as architectural photographers. And we've looked at some great painters and engravers and what they have to offer us. I wanted to take a little closer look at 5 painters in particular and show what I think is so important about what they do for us as architectural photographers, and to show you how I have used what I've learned from them in some of my own work. So let's take a look at the work of Caravaggio, Vermeer, Sanradam, Hopper, and Mondrian. And I want to look at a couple of things that we haven't talked about before. So, first of all, Caravaggio, who arguably one of really the great painters of all time. There are certain aspects of his work that inform what we do. He has usually a single light source. It's almost studio kind of lighting. Axial composition, this very dramatic chiaroscuro where he goes from dark to light, and carries it across the picture plane. Very precise control of shadows. They're all very compositional. He has a narrative access for direction. We talked about that when we looked at how to place people in your photographs. Notice they're looking at Christ, but all the eyes are in this direction, and as the viewer, Caravaggio carries you into the painting using these sight lines as guides. And also he has very carefully constructed still lifes with religious symbolism, and in general very warm tonalities. Here again, these are the items I'd like you to think about, and you can see all of these at play in the Martyrdom of St. Matthew and here in the Calling of St. Matthew. His single light source, control of shadows, and again, you have to look back for it, but in the midst of all this activity, he still has an axial composition set up back here and over here and over here. So how did this inform my own work? Well, when I was doing my book on historic Washington, Arkansas, I wanted to photograph the blacksmith in his shop. Well, it's not really very well lit. And I was trying to think, how am I going to light this? What kind of approach am I going to use? And I thought about how Caravaggio used his single light source and this control of shadows, deep shadow, bright highlights. And what I did, since we didn't have lights there, I went to the workstation and borrowed this pair of 1,000-watt, 3,200 degree Kelvin lights, put it here and just blasted it into the space and controlled my exposure so that I would have really deep shadows and nice bright highlights. And then I used the compositional scheme. I used rectangular armatures to determine where I wanted to place my blacksmith, where I wanted to place the top of the workstation. And so here's my diagonal. Here's my first setup for my rectangular armatures. So I stuck him over here, and he is basically placed according to this very precise control. I did this still life for a client of mine, Ton Lauk, and Ton Lauk loved Caravaggio, and he always thought that this basket of fruit that Caravaggio did with the rotten fruit, this was his take on the degeneracy of life that he found around him. And so on his patio, we wanted to do sort of something similar. So we found kind of rotten fruit. These bananas are well past their use by. We've got flowers and bromeliad. These are really gone. And then what I did is I used 3,200 Kelvin halogen lights, and then I set my camera at 5,500 so everything would be overly warm. And then again, I used a 2x3 proportional system to determine basically where I was going to put the main elements of this composition. We looked at Vermeer for so many things, but primarily how rigorously axial he was, how precisely he proportioned his picture plane, generally with golden section proportioning, and also how he used careful overlap to create these layers and layers and this sense of depth. Again, we're dealing with a three-dimensional world. We're compressing it into 2 dimensions, and everything we can do to still create a sense of depth makes our pictures that much better. And so here's a soft, warm light coming from one window source. And I've done that here. I've got a soft light coming this way here at Gunston Hall. The soft light coming through the window. I don't have any additional lighting. I just want this to be my main light. And here at Belmead, the same thing. The soft light coming in, just hitting the corner of the curtain, just across the desk, and just the tops of this chair. To basically try to do what Vermeer was doing with his lighting. Also, I go out of my way to make sure that I overlap carefully all the elements in my composition to give it a further sense of depth. And I have 2 main areas, this area and the bed area back here. And so I use Golden Sec 2:3 proportion to basically set all the major verticals and horizontals in this photograph. We looked at Peter Sonderdam almost from day one. His rule that we can follow: the wider the lens, the lower the eye height, to try to avoid that really bad foreground distortion that's kind of nauseating. And here's the choir at the Church of San Bavo, and very low eye height. I've done the same thing here in my photographs in Rome. In both of these views, the camera is less than 24 inches off the ground, so that my foreground is not distorted, and I've got this ceiling soaring overhead, which your eye readily accepts. It doesn't see that as disturbing as it would a ground plane dropping out. And here in Miami International Airport, the same thing. And even here in this Holly Hunt showroom, I'm about 1.5 feet, 2 feet off the ground, letting the ceiling soar overhead and keeping the foreground distortion to a bare minimum, if at all. Edward Hopper, we looked at Edward Hopper for his dynamic off-axis interior views and precise proportioning to give order to these off-axis views. And when you look at his off-axis paintings, the question is always what determines where he's going to put these key verticals. And I've done an analysis of his paintings using rectangular armatures to show how precisely he places his people and his vertical elements. Here's another example. She's sitting looking out. This is a key vertical element. This is a key vertical element. And here's the diagonal. Here's the first secondary diagonal to determine these 2 armatures. Here's the secondary one going this way to determine these armatures, where they cross. This gives you key vertical and horizontal lines to tell you, or to tell him, where he's going to place these key elements. And same thing here in the automat. She's tucked over here. Where she is really determined by this very firm sense of geometry. And I've done the same thing here in this library shot. I've got all my verticals and horizontals are precisely controlled by my 2:3 composition. But the other thing I've done is I've used my diagonals to kind of separate my people. Each one of them is in its own little diagonal frame. So the question is always, did you think about this when you were shooting? And the answer is yes. I have tried to study proportional systems using grids and guides, studying paintings, so that these proportional systems are right in front of my eye, very much the way a musician, a jazz musician, will listen to music and hear the chord changes, so that when he or she listens to the music, they know right where those chord changes are. They can just hear them and they can improvise around them. If they're part of you, then you'll see them out in front of you when you're setting up your imagery, and it will help you in every way. But you have to study and practice so that those proportional schemes become a part of your visual intelligence. He also Hopper uses light itself as an animating element. Here's Room by the Sea. This light is the star of this show here. And I've tried to do the same thing here in these interiors. I've let the light be the dominant feature coming in here, making the shadow, coming across and making these shadows. I haven't added any fill light. I want your eye to go right to these shafts of light. And this is something that the designer thinks about, where the windows are going to be, where the light's going to come in. And I want the photographs to reflect that, not just to have it be random. And the last painter I want to talk to you about a little bit more, we talked about Pierre Mondrian when we looked at industrial photography and how his rectilinear compositions give us something to think about when we're dealing with very complex interior spaces. Now, this is a boy's bedroom that Suzanne Martinson did, and we didn't have enough things that we brought in to be able to fill all these spaces, so we had to leave some blank. We had to put stuff in some, and we were thinking, both of us were thinking about how Mondrian would break up that space. Where would he leave emptiness, white space? Where would he put color in? And so I've darkened the areas where we put items in, and it makes a nice little pattern, very much like Mondrian did here. And again, in very complicated industrial spaces where you have a lot going on, I use axial compositions to bring order to all of this. And I'm also thinking about how he distributes his colors, how he distributes his verticals and horizontals, and where I'm going to set up and how I'm going to place my verticals and my horizontals in these industrial spaces to make an orderly yet dynamic photograph. So these are the 5 artists to really spend some time with: Caravaggio, Vermeer, Sanradam, Edward Hopper, and Pierre Mondrian. They have so much to tell us, so much to inform our work. And I think the more we study these great painters and engravers, the better our work will get. So this makes sense to you. If you enjoyed this video and think this will help you, please take the moment just to give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, welcome. The videos are free. We don't bombard you with lots of videos. We put out things when we find something really important, very often based on the emails and on the notes that I get saying, why don't you cover this? So we're going to do that. And if you have friends that are in this field and you think would be interested, please take the time and share it with them. The videos are free, but if you'd like to help support the channel, consider purchasing a copy of Architectural Photography and Composition. We have a second edition out now, and as I've mentioned before, technology changes. How could it not? Photoshop has features that it didn't have 3 years ago, 2 years ago. But compositional rules stay the same, and those are still in there. But I have included some of the newer techniques in processing that I think will help and will guide you in the workflows for your work. Now, if you would prefer something else, another way to learn this rather than working through a book on your own, consider purchasing a copy of Architectural Photography, The Fundamentals. That's a 46 lesson course on Udemy. I think you'll find it will have everything in there that you need, especially if you're just starting out. You may have a limited budget. This is going to be maybe one of the best investments you can make in short-circuiting the time that it takes to learn all of this information. It's all here in one place, and we're putting up new bonus videos. I think you will find it be invaluable to you in your work. So thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.